Hello, everybody. Welcome to Artwork. My name is Mollie Cronin. I'm the host. We are, as an NSCAD community, a global one. We're joining from all corners of the world, and our community of artists and practitioners can be found all over the world. But our talk today and our school is hosted in Kjipuktuk and Mi'kmaq in the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. We're honored to gather, speak, and make artwork here. As I mentioned, my name is Mollie Cronin. I am the host of Artwork Alumni Talks. And this month, our discussion, where we are joined by two NSCAD alum to talk on a particular topic related to their practices. This month, we are talking about time, and we're joined by Scott Wilk, BFA 2001, and Ali Nickerson, BFA 2003. And we're going to be talking about how time impacts their work, the creation of time pieces and pieces related to time. So Scott and Ali, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So to get us started, we're going to dive into one facet of time, and that is memory or the past. And I'd like you, if you could, to tell us a little bit about your time at NSCAD, your days as a student there, and how it has contributed to your practice now. So either one of you can jump on in.
Okay, I'll jump. Well, I started in NSCAD in painting. So I did painting and drawing, and I got about halfway through my degree, and then I took a weaving course and was like, oh, wait a minute, textiles is incredible. And I started doing a couple more textiles and a couple more textiles, and I transferred over to textiles afterwards. And I had an amazing time, like through it all. Like I had like Jerry Ferguson as a painting instructor, and he was incredible, like hugely informs so much that I do now. And then, Nako and Anka and all of the textiles department was lovely. And I really got into installation in my last year in textiles, where I started doing like a lot of Bauhaus type weaving. And they let me experiment with fishing line, and I was doing weavings with duct tape and just making catacombs of fabric and just I started to learn how to really experiment and really fail at large installation structures with fabric. I did a lot of really bad installations.
I love that. That's all part of the process, right?
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Great. Thanks, Ali. Scott, what about you? What was your time at NSCAD like?
Well, enjoyable as well, that's for sure. I spent most of my time in the printmaking and jewelry workshops, which have greatly influenced what I do now, that's for sure. Most of the techniques that I use today in making watches are directly from jewelry and printmaking. And I think it kind of trained my brain to think in that way, in terms of layering and design and that kind of thing.
Totally. Well, we're going to talk kind of more in depth about both of your practices and how it relates to our topic today. But I'd love if you could give us just a short introduction into what you do now, what your practice looks like, and what you do for work. And Scott, I'm still looking at you, so maybe we can jump back in with you.
Sure. I work full time making watches. A lot of the work that I do, it's mechanical watches, though I have introduced some quartz watches into my product line. So I'm more on the craft end, I guess, of things in terms of my work. But I do craft shows, like the large ones, like the One of a Kind show here in Toronto, and some smaller ones to sell my work. And I take custom work, and I do have my own design line, of different styles of watches. And that's kind of the day-to-day thing for me.
Amazing. Thanks so much. Ali, what about you? Can you tell us a bit about your current practice?
My practice is going actually through a bit of a metamorphosis right now.
Cool.
I have I work in whatever medium I feel suits the project I want to work on. And so I do like drawing and painting and textiles, and then I've done a lot of robotics and installation, woodworking, large sculpture. Like it just depends on the theme and the idea that I'm going for, and then I pick the mediums that complement my concepts. And right now I'm doing a lot of two-dimensional works with repeat wallpaper, textile design, layering things. I'll talk more later.
Nice. And you're teaching at NSCAD as well. I think
Yeah, I'm
you're at the
teaching
school now.
NSCAD.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay, great. Well, we'll talk a bit about kind of how you both ended up in those paths. And Scott, I want to come back to you for a second, and ask about you describe catching the watchmaking bug while you were working as a gemologist, I believe. Can you talk a bit about what was unique about watchmaking to you after your background in other jewelry making and related fields?
Well, I guess I have to go back a bit. I want to start when I was making jewelry. So after I graduated NSCAD, I did start making jewelry on the side. While my wife was doing her graduate degree in Nova Scotia, I did a little bit, but I was mostly working full time at a call center, which was not fun. Um, got to pay the bills. Um, but I slowly, once we moved to Toronto, then I started doing craft shows. I started making my own line of jewelry, and I got a part-time job at a jewelry store. And so, as I was going through a few years of that sort of, I don't know, I discovered watches in that way. I never really had an inkling to, you know, explore watches or had any interest in watches. I just discovered them through this little hole in the wall shop that I was working at in the basement of the Eaton Center. So once I discovered that, there was sort of a lot of trial and error and learning over a number of years to kind of figure out, how watchmaking works. Unfortunately, I didn't go to school for watchmaking. So, that would have been very beneficial, I think, but I figured it out, you know.
Yeah, learned on the job, as it were.
Yeah, on the
Yeah.
job, and I did correspondence study courses through a place in the UK
Oh, cool.
and harassed watchmakers here in Toronto to kind of show me things. So
Yeah. That's very old school, which seems fitting for the medium. I like that.
for sure. Absolutely.
Amazing. Ali, I want to talk to you for a second about time, about our topic for the day, where for Scott, it's very evident we're talking about time, what timepieces, watchmaking. But I'm curious to talk to you, Ali, about where time fits into your work and what is your sort of interest or particular time-related concepts that you find that you return to in your practice.
Well, time for me, because I use it a lot to build tension in my installations. And so a lot of my work, all of my work deals with environmental impact and issues pertaining to that. And so I like to create installations that have to make people pause and wait and really contemplate what's happening in the installation and be sort of self-reflective. So I try to use time as almost an ingredient. Like I know, like I also like making bread, and there's a book that is like salt, something, and time is one of the ingredients. I'm like, oh, time is one of my ingredients too. So I really like to incorporate it as a breathing space when people are engaging with my work. And I like to use time in the sense of sort of a memory or a sort of nostalgia. So it can be like juxtaposed to the present day to create a sort of uncanny feeling.
Amazing. Yeah, and if we're talking about it kind of environmentalism, that's a very time sensitive concern, of course, right? So
it is completely.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's the nice thing about time as a concept is it is so expansive. We can talk about it in a lot of ways in our work, right? Yeah. Scott, can you talk a bit about your work creating custom watches or custom designs and watches? What is it that draws people to a kind of custom work in timepieces? Is it nostalgia, like Ali brought up about her practice, or is it practicality or beauty? What are the things people are typically looking for when they are working with you to create a custom timepiece?
I think it's kind of all of the above. They want to have all those things, and some people just want something unique, so they'll come to me and say, I want you to do your thing and just create something and in my artistic way. And sometimes it's more along the lines of a couple of the pieces I just finished. They had a very specific idea about what they wanted, or they wanted something incorporated into an existing design. So I do a lot of that kind of thing where it's I'm I don't know. Well, sometimes it's just customized. So, adding a birthday or an anniversary date or something along those lines onto the work somewhere. Usually I do that on the back of the piece, but sometimes people want it like right on the dial on the front. Um, but yeah, sometimes it can be just a theme, that someone comes to me and says, I want to watch and I like your style. And so I'll create something along those lines as well. And usually I work with them. I want to have the customer input and so people feel that they worked with me to create something totally unique that's just for them.
Yeah, wonderful. And I mean, the thing about watches is I imagine that you encounter is people don't perhaps need watches in the way they might have historically, is that many of us are reliant on technology to tell us time. So I imagine there's something kind of something particular that draws them to wanting to have time jewelry, right? To have watches. Do you have a
For
sense of
sure.
what brings people to that desire?
Oh, that's a good question. um, I think, well, unfortunately, watches did go through a time period, not just mine, um, in the late 80s, where the mechanical watch industry was almost destroyed by quartz watches, like battery watches, because they suddenly became extremely affordable. So I think a lot of it is sort of nostalgia, for people that sort of went through that, and they like having a piece that, doesn't require batteries or, constant maintenance and that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm not really sure if I'm answering your question,
It's okay.
but
It's a complicated question, I'm sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a tough one. I don't
It's
know if
okay.
I
We
have an answer
can
for that one.
no, we can kind of, maybe we'll come back to it and think about it,
Hmm.
or maybe we don't have an answer. It's a large question uh for our topic, but I was just thinking about it in relation to your work.
Yeah,
So
I think it's just, jewelry is very personal to most
yeah,
people, I find, and when they get a custom piece made, it just becomes part of them,
yeah,
and I hear it from customers all the time. Oh, I forget to put my watch on in the morning and then I feel naked.
yeah,
Like, and I feel the same way. I get in the car to take the kids to school or something, and I forget my watch. I'm constantly like, where is it? Where is it? So
yeah. It becomes like your glasses or your wedding band or something that becomes so
yeah,
part of you. Yeah, an extension of you. Yeah.
exactly.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Scott. Ali, I want to talk to you about mechanisms, kind of similar. Tangent. You use a lot of machinery and mechanical work in your artwork. Can you talk about how uh, some of these machines for you bring up concepts of time?
Yeah, sure. I think that the one that's like the most sort of like on the nose for time was a piece called it was called Little Stinker, and it was installed in a fairly large gallery. And so all the walls were painted really soft pastel colors. And my friend before this had given me a garage door opener because he was renovating his parents' house and was like, here, we use this. And I was like, someday I'll use that. And I just put it in the corner. And then I had this idea because the gallery offered me a show. And I created a piece that was on a timer. So an action happened once every 30 minutes. So it happened on the hour and on the half. So it was almost like a clock, like it would tell when you tell what time it was. And so again, it was an environmental issue based work. And I built like a sort of Parks Canada pathway around the installation that was in a loop too. So if the viewer wanted to engage with the piece, they had to get on the path, they had to choose to be a part of the system and then walk it and then choose to like leave the system. And in the center of the walkway was probably about 30 wax bunnies. And they were all sitting there like looking up, they're all from the same mold. They're looking at those one bunny that I had attached to the motor. So the garage door motor was here. And then at the other end, I built a concrete wall. And then got a chain and connected it. And with the right tension, the right speed, I got it to move very, very slowly. So once every half an hour, the garage door timer would go off and go ding. And the little bunny would move all the way across the room and smash into the brick wall and then go back. And this show went on for a month. So it was like this slow decay of the bunny and everybody slowly watching it. And on the inside was a bronze hairball. I carved, it was like a super scrappy style. Like I got somebody to do the bronze. I don't do bronze, so I paid somebody to pour it for me. But yeah, so that was like the discarded sort of gross waste that was like left over. So I was really working on like the romanticization of nature and our own like constant actions as like individuals and communities that just slowly build up over time until we all just slowly die.
Whoa.
It was called the slow death, the slow death machine. So the bunny just slowly killed itself over a month, and all the other bunnies did nothing and just watched it happen. And it was just me reflecting the society that I see around us when dealing with climate change.
Yeah, totally. And then then also these like just like physical manifestations of time, like the loop of like walking in a circle, or the way that I imagine the show would change if you saw it at multiple points. Like the longer it was on display, the more it differed from your previous visit, perhaps.
Yeah, the more it got beat up.
Yeah. The more that hairball shone through.
Yeah, most beautiful bronze hairball. Like, what is that? And also I liked it because the viewers would come, but nobody knew the timer's pattern, like what half an hour mark it was going on. So if you got there and you're like, shoot, I missed it. You're like, are you stuck in the gallery for 30 minutes walking the loop, like waiting to see the bunny like try to off itself? Or did you just or did you get there at the perfect time? So there's a lot of different ways that time really worked. And again, that's how I use time, is like to create an anxiety and like a breathing space for the viewer to interact with all the installation elements.
Yeah, that tension that you mentioned. Yeah. Sorry to rhyme by accident.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Ali.
Yeah.
Scott, I want to talk a bit more about the kind of balancing of practical function and creative design in watchmaking. Are there particular projects you've undertaken or designs you've incorporated into your watch faces that had to kind of balance the practicalities of like telling time and creative visions by you or the client, for example?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a constant battle.
Yeah.
That's for sure. There are so many technical restrictions, on my canvas, basically. Um, uh, the entire watch is built around the mechanism, and all of the measurements and everything is built around that to make sure that everything functions properly and there's enough space for everything to move. So I get a lot of clients who have these very grand ideas about what I can do, and then I have to bring them down to earth, unfortunately. Sometimes I would love to be able to try to do what they're asking, but it usually is next to impossible, especially given budgets. That's usually one of the huge factors, is whatever their budget happens to be. So I'm not creating like the entirety of the watch from scratch. I'm just usually making the dial or the face is the custom part. So, yeah, balancing design and functionality also, it's tricky because a lot of people again want things that don't go together, aesthetically, I find, at least. Or it makes reading the time impossible. Like the watch is totally illegible. And that's okay sometimes if that's really what the person wants. But I have to have a lot of discussions and educating people as to, oh, you're not going to be able to read the time, or these hands are too high or too low contrast with the colors that you've chosen, and this really busy design on the dial and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of direct conversation with the client to make sure that they're getting what they want, but at the same time they're not going to look at it later and go, oh, I can't read what this says. It's a fine balance for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. And I try as much as possible to make sure that it's legible, like the time is legible at least.
Yeah, because it's a practical object at the end of the day, and a beautiful one. So having to create something where both of those elements are having enough space to breathe, I'm sure is like
absolutely. Yeah, and as well, I do a lot of like the custom skeletonization, so you can see right through the dial and see all the mechanical parts behind. That creates in more complication with the design in terms of legibility. So yeah, I can show you some later if I can figure out how to share my screen.
And I think I saw some, I can talk about for people that aren't familiar with this. I saw some on your Instagram, I think, or on your website, where there's almost like it's like think about like a glass bottom ceiling boat or something, where like the face has been kind of cut away to reveal the mechanics of the watch underneath. But like you said, that the consideration that goes into that is that the hands, I think, have to kind of like move down or move away so that they're not over top of the gears, or like how do you balance those things in that particular design?
Like the hands are on top of everything.
Okay.
So having cutouts in the dial really doesn't interfere with the functionality of the watch, other than visually, like legibility and that kind of thing. But there are other considerations, because sometimes customers want things sticking up off of the dial surface, to create more depth in the watch, kind of visually. And a lot of the time it's impossible. The hands are like maybe half a millimeter or lower up off the dial surface. So there really isn't a lot of room to be adding extra layers in. But
get like a watch
sometimes I can make it work. Yeah, otherwise, you end up with a really thick watch. But most of the time, again, it's the budget that's the problem. So I use cases I've designed, but then I have another company that makes those for me, and those are pretty much standard heights and everything inside, and it just doesn't work out most of the time for creating a lot of depth.
Yeah. But that particular design is so interesting because it really kind of you were talking about the introduction of battery operated watches in the 80s and how that affected the kind of industry overall, and to have these contemporary pieces that showcase the mechanics, the kind of, I'm assuming, like non-battery operated, the gear operated,
that's right. Yep.
Is very speaks to the kind of history of the field as well.
For sure. Yeah, and mechanical watches certainly are making a comeback.
Yeah, that's great.
It's kind of, the history is not lost, and there's a lot of people kind of graduating watchmaking school now that are not going into working for one of the big companies, and they're starting their own ateliers and that kind of thing. So it's exciting to see, more independent watchmaking happening. That's for sure. Because when I started, wow, there wasn't many. Yeah. That's for sure.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Scott. Ali, I want to come to your Nuit Blanche piece, because you talk about a certain kind of, you phrase it as a just-in-time production style for your piece, Blue Christmas, I believe. Can you talk about that piece and that production style that you're talking about there?
Sure. That was coined by David Diamond after he experienced the installation. So it was a giant Christmas present. It was about 20 feet by 20 feet by 20 feet, made out of like scrappy plywood that I painted with like green polka dots, and then decorated the top with old tarps that I had found and a whole bunch of garbage. And I hired 4 other artists to work with me, and we were Christmas elves inside the present. And we collected garbage for probably a month up until the show, like dumpster diving and like put a call out to the school, and it was just like collecting all the little bits of everything that was left over. And so what we did is we made Christmas presents for everybody. So I also had these really fun plexiglass windows cut out that I had done a residency at the BAMP Center, and somebody had made all these plexiglass windows but threw them out because they had too many bubbles in them or something. And they said I could have them. So I was like, awesome. So it was like these fish dome bubbles so people could come and like watch the elves make presents. And so we all got dressed up in costumes. And then the viewer would come up to the first window and they'd tell us what they wanted for Christmas. And then I made little cookie cutter like cookies, which just had a number on. We'd give them the number. And then they had to go and wait out around all of the Christmas decorations. So the whole place was decorated. And I put a call on social media for old vintage Christmas decorations. So the whole area was like very old Grinchy style, I guess. Like it was pretty like a disheveled Christmas land. And so people come, they'd order their present, and then one elf would have it, and they'd make their present as fast as they possibly could. And then we'd call up the number and they'd come to the next window and they'd come pick it up. So It was made, I set it all up like basically like a McDonald's. My first job out of high school, was working the drive-through at McDonald's. And I basically just made this into like a drive-through present. And so what ended up happening was that it was pretty successful and there was like a pretty long line. So we had so many people just standing around that present. And so again, this waiting period happened where the people who thought they were getting their present had to stand with all the other viewers, and then all this other like work that was almost unintended started happening, where everyone was talking to each other about their wishes and their desires. And then it was about consumerism, and it was about consumption, and what do we need, and what we don't actually need, and all these wasted materials, because they would get their present and then they'd be like, I wanted a Ferrari, and it was just like a bunch of garbage glued together with some sparkles on it. Like it never worked. Like everybody was always sad. And they're like, well, do I actually need the Ferrari? Like, what is the Ferrari? Like, and what is this meaning? And why do I want it? And so it created this really interesting dialogue. So again, time became one of the elements of the work, where the viewers waiting to get their gifts became part of what the work was. And it also helped really address like labor as commodity. So I was addressing consumption and consumerism, environmental waste, labor rights. I paid my elves. I guess that was fun. I mean, the other thing we did is I had little buttons that if somebody asked for something that was too complicated, like world peace, I'd just be like, you're naughty, on the naughty list, and they got a naughty button.
You're wasting my time.
Yeah, world peace, no way. So time ended up being this element of how the elves themselves worked. And so it was coined by the curator. It was just in time way of minutes. So we were like little fast food workers making your dreams come through for trash. And then the waiting period that the viewers had to go through to get their trash gifts became a huge element of the work, which honestly wasn't necessarily even intended. And it was something that grew and grew and got bigger and bigger, and ended up being one of the most interesting parts for us. Oh, and we were there for 12 hours. So it was a durational piece.
Wow.
So we made presents for 12 hours straight.
Another big time element. That's
another one. Yeah. So there's lots of different time elements for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to confirm what did the curator mean by just in time, do you think? I'm still wanting to kind of pinpoint
well, it was because it's this fast food industry,
right?
Like building the most minimum product possible as fast as you can, get the biggest bang for your buck as an like business model. So it was we were producing the presents, like they were pretty scrappy, like they were. So it was how fast we were working.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah.
And the time in relation to labor is like very poignant, because labor takes time, and making things well takes time, and making things poorly even sometimes takes time.
Too. and I can report that only one child cried. Which, it comes with a piece.
Good. That's a pretty good ratio. That's probably more than real elves and Santa's signature.
You're pretty creepy looking elves.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Ali. No sorry, that picture really got me for a second. Scott, I want to come back to, you were talking about kind of the field of horology and about the training you experienced. And I'd love to talk a bit more about the making of watches, specifically in Canada, and what training typically looks like, what the industry looks like. Anything else we should kind of know in general about the field of horology in Canada?
Sure. Like in general, just not in Canada. Watchmaking is usually done by big business. So you have like Swatch Group, and you have Rolex, and you have all the big, names that are very recognizable. And they basically run the entire industry. Even the manufacturing of movements, like the mechanical part that I can purchase and use in my work, it's still those companies making them. So, being trained in watchmaking or horology is most of the time going to school for it. Most of the schools in the world are sponsored by the watch industry or those big companies, so that when you are finished, you basically just get a job at that company, and I've heard that the placement rate is almost 100%. So if you want a job, you want to be a watchmaker, you got one, as long as you have the skills and can do what they want you to do, because it does require quite a skill set, and they will teach you, but it's, from my understanding at least, because I didn't go, but I've met lots of watchmakers and it sounded crazy. But in Canada, when I first started, it seemed like it was almost non-existent. Like I've had trouble finding anybody who was like an independent watchmaker, trying to learn how to do anything. It was, wow, it was difficult. Because at that time the internet wasn't the same as it is now. YouTube wasn't like it is now, that kind of thing. So that's how I ended up studying through a place in the UK, the British Horological Institute, and I was able to get, it was one of the only ones at the time, correspondence study course. So like learn, right? So, my jewelry background from NSCAD definitely helped me. All those skills that I learned, it was extremely transferable to watchmaking, but there was definitely a lot of practical stuff that it was very difficult. Like, wow, it's so hard. And there's still lots I don't know. I'm learning all the time. It's such a huge field. But I think, if someone wants to be a watchmaker, I would highly suggest going to watchmaking school. It's really like the only real way, other than if you find someone that, yeah, you can apprentice with. But I think that sort of thing is not really happening much these days. Watchmakers can't spend the time to teach someone else because they just don't have the time, which is kind of ironic seeing as we're talking about time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's unfortunate that that's the case. But there are more people in Canada doing that. I have seen online, new faces that I've never seen before, that are true watchmakers, but a lot of the watch companies out there they're not watchmakers. They're business people or designers that design the watch and then have it entirely made overseas.
Right.
And then
right.
they sell
Okay.
it. So there's a lot of that for sure.
So what are some particular skills that independent watchmakers need to have in creating and designing watches?
Like in terms of skill set, it's a lot of the same things as jewelry. So sawing, filing, sanding, that sort of thing. Learning how to use equipment like lathes, and that sort of thing. But it's becoming very modernized. So a lot of CNC kind of machinery and automatic lathe work and that sort of thing. I don't do any of that myself. I do a lot of work I design things in the computer, and I have a guy here in Toronto that does laser cutting and engraving for me. And then I get the piece back after it's been lasered. And then I do a lot of handwork myself and hand painting and assembly and that sort of thing.
Cool. All while up against big watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I try, at the beginning, I used to view them as competition, but, that was just naivety. They're totally not, I don't have any, I'm doing a totally different thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's, I'm a watch artisan, I guess you could say. And,
yeah, I totally would say that.
I work in the basement of my house. So
yeah,
it's just, that's it. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Scott. I guess maybe we could talk in general for both of you. I could turn the question to, does working in a field that where time is on your mind, time-based media or creation of timepieces, does it affect the way you think about time in your daily life? Do some of these practices kind of find their way into your day-to-day life at all? Ali, you're nodding. Yeah.
I would say yeah. So I use time. I'm gonna actually sort of just throw in like the course that I taught.
Oh yeah, that was the other question I meant to ask you. Go for it. Talk about that.
I taught a course at NSCAD that I developed called Time, and it was held on McNabb's Island. So we would have to take the boat, which was really long. It was like an hour-long boat ride, the beginning and the end, which was just fabulous. But then there was nothing, the class was nothing but contemplation at that point. But then we cleaned up, basically the Nuit Blanche show was the impetus for the course. So the students had two tours that they had to go through. So one was Don Forbes, who was a retired prof from Dal and works at the Bedford Institution of Oceanography. And he talked about how over time the island is changing and how rapidly the island is changing now due to climate change and like greater storms and hurricanes, and how there's like all these like the rocks and the way the water moves around the island and creating new inlets. Everything's totally changing. And then the second tour was from Royce Walker, who worked for the oil companies his whole life and then retired and became a pseudo historian about the island and has a very different take on the island. So the students had to respond by picking up all the garbage off the island and then making an installation or a textiles work with the garbage that they had found in response to the two tours. And the title of the course was Time, because it's like, it's now, like there's this anxiety, like things are changing, irreparable damage is happening, the island's going to be destroyed. Like this weekend, one of my favorite, Risser's Beach, I'm from the South Shore of Nova Scotia, was destroyed. The pictures are really sad. And so for me, there's an urgency and an anxiety at the time. That's what I play with. It creates, the time I use in my work is like an anxiety element or something. Like it's a way to create tension for the pieces and tension for the viewer. And so I don't know how I can't, like I look at everything, I go to the grocery store and I'm like, how much plastic is on that? And so I have like constant anxiety now, like environmental anxiety, I think, between I've been making pieces like this for, I mean, this has been my theme for probably 10 years straight now. And so it's like, it's part of everything that I do. So I think it's time gives me anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah. And the sensitivity of time, things being time sensitive, right?
Yeah.
Is like very anxiety
Inducing. I gotta go. So like,
yeah.
we gotta hurry, guys. Like,
Yeah.
So I think
did the students respond that way? Did they kind of like adopt anxieties, or were they, did they kind of lean a certain way in making that work?
They did for sure. Like it was kind of hard not to. But
Yeah.
with the when you hear about how much things are changing and you can see it in front of you, the students made incredible work. Like it was my favorite class I've ever taught. It was so fun. And yeah, they did these incredible like sculptures out of all the rope that had washed off and all the ghost gear and like elastic bands, and they ended up creating a festival and like a fair where everybody who came to the island that day of the class got to engage with the students and play the games and then win prizes made of garbage that they had found from the beach. It was really fun.
Was the fair on the island, or was it at the school? Or
yeah, the whole class was on the island.
Oh wow, cool.
The school ever.
Well, yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Yeah, it was really cool. And so I think I had students say that they took the class because they're so crippled with the time frame of anxiety of global change, didn't know how to talk about it, and it became sort of almost like a safe space for all us to all share our feelings on everything that's happening around us. And then some really interesting work came from it too.
Has that had an impact in how you teach your other courses now? Does that like frame anything else that you bring into the classroom now?
Well, yeah, I just say currently my foundation students have a project where I made them dumpster dive into a sculpture project.
Cool.
Yeah, like because I have to learn about point, line, and plane, and so I was like, you have to show me how to create a point and create a line, implied or not, and all of that sort of stuff, and then to abstract drawings, and then go dumpster diving, collect garbage, and make a sculptural object from their abstracted drawing. So yeah, and I tell them that resources are scarce, reuse constantly, and I tell them that it's okay to screw up, and create a safe space is really nice. It happened with time. So creating that for first year students is also, I think, been really, really helpful for them in creating a good classroom dynamic.
Yeah, I think that's great. And in a time where, yeah, resources are so scarce, allowing them to kind of like experiment and get messy and fail, I'm sure is like really, yeah. Sounds really valuable. Thanks, Ali. And thank you for reminding me. I knew I had one more question I wanted to ask you about your practice.
Yeah, and I was like, it also links into my anxieties about the world around me. Like, oh my God, is a storm coming? Like, what's next?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Scott, can we talk a bit about time, about how you spend your time as like an independent watchmaker? Like, has how you maybe like split your time between working at home? Does that create like, are you, sorry, I'm making this question up on the spot, when you mentioned your basement workshop, does working independently like this mean that you're more thoughtful about your time? Are you workaholic, and how do you kind of manage your time between creating and selling at these fairs and things like that? What does time look like in your job, basically, to narrow it down?
It's a tough balance for sure.
Yeah.
You know, there's definitely pros and cons to running your own business. When I worked at a place, you know, jewelry stores and things, it was nice because it was structured and you were there and then you left and you didn't need to think about it. Right. But I found over the years that, yeah, it's really hard because you're constantly thinking about, you know, what do I need to do? What's on the thing? Oh, it's like midnight and I'm checking emails and responding and this and that. And, you know, I do find it advantageous to have the workshop here because it's so great to be able to just go and do work whenever I want, right? Though now with two kids and everything, balancing everything, it's certainly tough. And I don't know. Sometimes I yearn for those. He's long gone, you know, where you know I didn't have to think about work outside of work. But I don't know. I don't think I would ever give it up. You know, I enjoy being independent and being my own boss. But yeah, the normal day is yeah, deal with children and then they go to school and I go downstairs and I work and then I gotta, you know, think about feeding myself or my wife will feed me, thankfully, sometimes. And you know, then work again and then kids and then maybe more work, maybe relaxation. It's you know, time is certainly on my mind all the time. And I know it sounds kind of funny, but yeah, it's tough. But doing shows is also one of those things where, you know, it's great to be in a different environment, you know, and I get to actually talk to people, you know, and converse and have social interaction, that sort of thing. Because a lot of the interactions that I have are usually emails or text messages and that sort of thing. I do have people here as well that if they want to purchase or I'll go out in the world and meet them somewhere. But yeah, it's no, the shows are nice, but when they're done, I'm glad.
Yeah, that's a lot, right?
Yeah, well, especially you know doing the one of a kind show it's
Yeah.
a slog. You know,
Yeah,
it's
totally.
the winter one is yeah almost 2 weeks long, and you're there for almost 12 hours a day, and every single day, no days off. So yeah, it's a lot sometimes.
Yeah, and that's the thing about, you know, when we work independently or when we have practices as artists, is that we have some control over our time, where we don't have a kind of like strict 9 to 5, but it also means that time kind of gets away from us, that we kind of become consumed by our jobs or our practices, and we are not always the master of our own time in that
No,
way.
not at all. I can't believe it's already been like almost 13 years that I've been doing
Wow.
watches. It seems like sometimes just, well, it was yesterday.
Yeah.
You know, you do lose track, even though it's on your mind all the time. So.
I know I'm really aware of like all the time like phrases or metaphors I use in speaking now for you
Yeah,
in this
yeah.
talk.
I hear it from customers all the time
Yeah.
at the shows. It's just you can guarantee there's going to be almost a pun every day.
Oh
You
my
know,
God.
so yeah.
Well, I want to open it up to questions in a moment, but before I do, I want to give you both a chance to I like to ask a question to our visitors, our guests, about things they're working on, but also if they don't want to talk about work, about ways that they're spending their time. So is there anything coming up that you'd like us to know about? Any projects on the go, or alternatively, ways that you're spending your time these days, both of you?
Okay. Well, I started making a whole new body of work that I did it secretly because I was testing it out and like had like a secret show of like landscape paintings that I did last year. I didn't tell anybody about because I'm like figuring out who I am again. Because with all of the conversations of anxiety and time, all these installations I've done were funded by galleries. I got paid to do them for a specific site, specific space. So after it's over, all of the wood is gone. You know, I have a box of bunny. So like all the resources I'm using to talk about resource depletion really kind of messed with my head. So I had to figure out how to, I wanted to start making work that was more permanent again, instead of things that were like for a situation specific. I just didn't want to leave such a big footprint myself. And yeah, so I've started documenting the places that I really care about and that are really important to me. Like I grew up in rural Nova Scotia, and I grew up as like a country bumpkin in the woods, crawling through weird garbage piles that people had dumped out like a long time ago, and like just all of that kind of stuff. And I love it. Like I love growing up there, and I love my weird rural bumpkin existence. And so I've been documenting it all, and then doing landscape-esque sort of paintings, but they're not real landscape paintings. It's all still working out. It's probably a bit complicated. Yeah, I'm doing like repeat fabric and wallpaper designs that I'm silk screening onto the back of the painting to create a sense of like nostalgia and home, and then painting very eerie spots of rural Nova Scotia on top of it, and playing with like what is there and a celebration of what's there, but like what's being lost, and these sort of like clips, snapshots of moments that may have happened or may not have happened, and sort of unsettling, uncanny film noir way. So that's what I'm doing right now.
That sounds great. Wow, can't wait to see those.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks, Ali.
Yeah, no problem.
Scott, what about you? What projects do you have on the go, or how are you spending your time in the next little bit?
Well, recently because of the pandemic, I had extra time on my hands. So my business took kind of a nosedive, unfortunately, as did a lot of other people. But it allowed me to create a new line of watches that I always wanted to make, which was kind of a lower end with battery movements, and using different materials, because I'd used jewelry materials basically since the beginning. And I wanted to create something that was a little bit faster for me to make and to keep the price points down for customers. And the pandemic seemed like a perfect time to do that. So there was a whole brand new line of customizable timepieces that I made, using like just flat colors and shell and wood and stuff that are totally different from my normal kind of wheelhouse. So that was nice. That was good. And these days now my eyes are set on creating another line of watches that are higher end. So using different types of mechanisms, being able to bring in different types of complications into the work. Complications mean like functionality in the work. So like doodads and gizmos, basically, like a moon phase indicator, or a power reserve indicator, chronographs, that sort of thing, which is like a stopwatch in your watch. So all these things in the watch industry, people like all the doodads.
Yeah.
So
Gizmos.
that's kind of on the horizon.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
great.
there's thing, and also movement decoration as well.
Yeah.
So being able to apply different finishes to the actual movement or mechanism, because that's the part I don't make. And I haven't really delved into doing that yet, but I'll dibble dabble not at it, not really serious. So maybe I'll get around to that, but we'll see. It depends on how many people come my way and allow me the time to be able to focus on that sort of thing.
Gotcha. Are you showing at any fairs around the holidays this year? Anything coming
Yeah,
up?
one of a kind show again.
Great.
Yep. So yeah, this will be like the 13th year I think I've done the winter one of a kind, and I do the spring show as well. Though I am cutting back on a lot of these kind of arts and crafts shows, because I'm just finding that it's taxing.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
And lugging everything to and from and all that kind of stuff is, my body doesn't agree with that as much anymore as it used to. So
Yeah, fair enough.
yeah, it's more gray.
Scott, do you get approached by young watchmakers or people who are interested in entering horology? And if so, what kind of advice do you give them, or what would you give? What kind of advice would you give to somebody who was interested in entering this field?
I do have that on a fairly regular basis, though meaning like maybe once a year or something like that. I'll get an email or, you know, and usually I kind of give them my story and tell them all the things that I went through to get to where I am, and then advise them if they truly wanted to be a watchmaker to go to watchmaking school. Because it's the fastest, best way to learn. You know, it's very technical, so you're really basically learning to be like a car mechanic, you know, for a watch. Um, but you're not going to learn anything about design usually, that sort of thing. So if they have an artistic inclination, then I will tell them to do things maybe a little differently. Um, you know, it depends on their situation too. Like for me, I couldn't get away to watchmaking school because we were thinking about a family and
Yeah.
all those sorts of things. And I just had other obligations that were made it impossible. Even though there is a watchmaking school in Canada, I believe still in Trois-Rivières in Quebec, but it's the only one that I know of here. But there are some in the States, so it's not too far. That's for sure.
Scott, is there like for the design element, do you recommend them going to jewelry school? Do you recommend them going to like a certain kind of design program, or like what would you advise people to do if they're looking to enter the kind of more artistic side of watchmaking like you did?
Yeah, like jewelry is a great place to start for
Yeah.
sure. Or you can just go straight into like a design program, because a lot of the watchmaking industry is other people making things for you.
Yes.
So if they really wanted to do, you know, that sort of thing, then I would say, yeah, you know, get all those design skills, you know, down and learn how to use all of the programs because, you know, all that stuff constantly changes and everything's done in 3D anymore. So, you know, you need to have that sort of thing, that kind of base skill set,
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
but you know, it really depends on what you're looking to do. A lot of people, they just want to work with watches and they don't have any kind of artistic inclination. So they just want to take things apart and clean them and put them back together and get them working, all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks, Scott. We've got a couple questions for you in the chat, but I also want to ask Ali a question before we come back to those questions from Kara. Ali, we talked a bit about a similar question to what I posed for Scott of like, what do you do when these, you know, people entering this field have questions for you? Specifically, how do you talk to students, or what kind of tools do you offer them when they have these kinds of climate anxieties? Do you guys just like share them and are like, yeah, it's really scary? Or are there particular
Uh,
strategies you give them, or?
it's more of a commiseration, I think, necessarily. And I think when we talk about it in class, I just try to be like, I mean, as people, we get choices every day, you know, and like say like the little stinker piece where it's like this slow action sort of build up, like your daily choices as an individual and as a community can have huge effects. So maybe the best way to do it is enjoy life and try to make small differences that you feel comfortable with for yourself, because the big things are probably out of our hand, like until we can get like and governments to stop being so complacent and
Yeah.
banks to go. I mean, we can only do so much. So, you know, take care of yourself and get your art supplies from the dumpster and do what helps you get through the day.
Yeah. Do you have like creative ideas for them ever about how to consider waste in their work, like how to kind of mitigate waste, or how to like recycle or reuse materials, or how to share materials with each other? Does that
I
ever come
get
up?
them to share materials all the time, and if they're cutting out paper, I make them keep the scraps. So I
Yeah.
think it's about creating a pattern of thinking for them. And I get them to go through the dumpsters. I'm like, so there is like a metal shop and there's a plastic shop and there's all these great pieces of stuff in there. Like it could be anything you want it to be. And so I get them to go, and I'm sure Fuad's like, oh, all these students are here in the dumpster again.
Yeah, anytime I have a friend who's a sculptor who's like a NSCAD grad, we walk somewhere and they're always like lugging garbage home they found on the street. It's like, I can't take you guys anywhere. You're always collecting things.
Yeah, I try to make as much as I could out of garbage, but still, like, even if you got a certain amount of garbage, there's so much other materials that went into creating like large installations.
Yeah, exactly.
When it's over, it all just went back to the garbage, really, because I'm not going to keep a 20 by 20 foot polka dotted Christmas present in my backyard. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, the garbage cycles of art making, right?
And yeah, so I try to think of ways that you can save it or take things apart and like reuse it, but then it also depends on space and you know, rent and money and how do you store all of those art supplies that you've kept, and how do you figure out how to share?
But question was, do you think you can miss the craft shows because you built up your business? And if someone is getting started, would the shows be helpful to build your customer base?
For me, when I started, it was extremely helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Though I definitely had a lot of bumps in the road along the way, like at the beginning, for sure. Like the very first time I did the one of a kind show, I sold 0 things.
Oh man.
So it was really tough putting out all that money and then not having any return.
Because it's expensive to get a table there.
Yeah, it can be quite expensive. So, and time wise too, of
Yeah.
course. But I had made a number of errors in the work that I created in terms of what I was showing, and didn't really realize what my market really was. So I sort of corrected that for the next time. And because I had all women's high-end pieces, because I'd been making jewelry for so long, and
Right.
it was a majority of my customers were women. So then it's a total change for watches. Most of the watches are worn by men.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't realize that, and that was my error. So I fixed that. And then
So you
after
learned a
that,
lot by doing that show then.
absolutely, for sure.
And by
So
failing at the show.
yes, yeah. Well, learning from your mistakes is important,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And definitely I took it on the chin, but you have to kind of step past and realize that mistake making is part of learning and it's important. So,
Absolutely.
but I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question again?
The first part of the question was you were talking about maybe doing less of those shows, and is that
Oh,
because you kind of, after having done so many and all the other work you've done over the years, have you built up enough of a customer base that you can take some time off from those shows if you needed to or wanted to?
um, it's I think if the more shows you can do, the better,
Right.
probably to keep yourself out there and people seeing you and that sort of thing. Um, a lot of the other vendors I know have either left shows or stopped completely because maybe they do have that kind of customer base and are able to do that. I don't think I can do that, even though I'm reducing my shows. That's more for just me personally and not wanting to do all the lugging of all the equipment and the tents and all the tables and all that stuff is just pure selfishness, I guess. But in a way, I do have a certain amount of like a customer base. So, I am having a lot of my older customers come back for stuff like servicing of their timepieces or new timepieces and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I would highly suggest doing it though if you're starting out. Definitely the shows are a great place to get people to see your work. In combination with online and social media and all that sort of thing. Though, of course, social media these days doesn't seem to be as easy as it was when I first started doing it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And as the algorithm works less and less in our favor.
yeah,
Yeah, the shows I'm sure have a great appeal for meeting potential clients and collaborators and all these kinds of things.
no,
Yeah.
absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you guys both so much. It was so interesting to talk to you both about your work. You again to Scott and Ali for joining me. It was such a treat to talk to you both.
Thanks for
Thanks for
having me.
having us.